Bulbasaur is... wait a minute, get that model out of here. Ah, that is better. In Gen 5, Bulbasaur looks great, being such a happy little dude. He put so much detail in his movement, like look at that little bulb move. Ivysaur is honestly a great middle stage. The sprite also just does it more justice in the battle pose it takes, having it look stronger and more focused. Venusaur does look a lot less intimidating in the specific sprite, but it still gets across that it is big and strong, and honestly, that's all it needs to do. The Bulbasaur line in Gen 5 gets a 9 out of 10. Charmander is such a happy little fella, just sitting there waving his arms around adorably, though the tail movement is a bit weird to me. It moves kind of like a crank. Charmeleon actually doesn't look its best this gen. It doesn't really get a cool pose like in the past gens, and the movement is just really rigid to be fair. Could have been a bit better. With Charizard, looking at the sprites, this is just a platinum sprite, but animated, which is quite interesting to see. Though I think Charizard does just look goofy in this sprite. The huge slouch and awkward mouth along with its boring movements just doesn't make Charizard look that good. And I think this is a great line normally, and it deserves the love it gets, but it just feels like they slacked here a bit, not holding the Charmander line to that high standards. 6.5 out of 10. Squirtle is my absolute favorite Pokemon. But man, does it disappoint me that Gen 5 sprite is just the Gen 4 sprite, but animated. And the animation is just a basic jump and arm wiggle. But at least it's still a cute jump and arm wiggle. Voltorb was the only one from this line to get a new sprite, but it has the same animation as Squirtle, which is kind of funny. It is a good sprite, however, I do think it lacks much character as past sprites, not making it my favorite. Blastoise is an absolute banger in this generation. Yes, it may just be its Gen 4 sprite flipped on the y-axis, and I promise this will be the last time I mention any Pokemon just being a copy of its Gen 4 sprite, because I would say it for a lot of Pokemon then. The animation they gave it is just great. It looks goofy by the way it moves and just reminds me of an actual tortoise, and it's just awesome. The Squirtle line may not have gotten a lot of love in the creation this generation, but I still can't help but like it. 7.5 out of 10. Caterpie looks adorable this generation. Being such a simple design, there isn't much you can really do with animating it, but the simple wiggle is much Caterpillar-like, so it works really well. Metapod is in the same boat. Being just a cocoon, it doesn't really move, but the sprite looks well nonetheless. Butterfree looks great. Though I wish the animations made it more happier, the little nose wiggle it gives it though is adorable. Overall, this line is done well. 8 out of 10. Weedle's wiggling here is just amazing. Weedle's already just a weird Pokemon, and the movements they gave it just work so well. I don't really know what else to say, so just look at it. Kakuna slows it down a bit. Unsure if it actually wants to stand up or not, the back and forth is just hypnotic. Beedrill is also done well here. You're just seeing the wings and the angry jab it gives with the stingers are a perfect fit for this mon. This line does great in this generation. 9 out of 10. I'm actually a bit disappointed in the sprites for the Pidgey line. Pidgey as a sprite doesn't look bad, but the animation is just weird. Pidgeotto would be fine if it closed its beak. The flapping is cool, but it just looks so awkward with the mouth open. Pidgeot's sprite looks amazing here, but why is the animation so boring? They had the opportunity to add like a cool streak with it with the wings open, but they didn't. It just slowly bobs up and down instead. Overall, the sprites look great, but I think they could have been better. 7 out of 10. Rattata looks like it's ready to attack. Honestly cool to see a battle sprite actually be constantly prepared for battle, since this isn't always a thing. Raticate kind of adapts this, but it just might be that Raticate always seems to look like it wants to fight. Though Rattata is doing it more so out of fear, Raticate is just angry. I also love the fangs. The Rattata line is actually just kind of perfect for this generation. 10 out of 10. When it comes to the Spearow line, the first thing you probably think of is his mean stare and cruel demeanor. However, with the Gen 5 sprites, I don't get that at all. Spearow kind of just looks constantly surprised and crazy, and Spearow could be seen as crazy as well, but it also needs that kind of angry feel to it, which it doesn't really have. The animation helps a little bit with giving it a bit more twitchy feel to it, but even then it's so slight it doesn't really work for me. Spearow comes off the same way. It doesn't look mean or grumpy, but instead calm and collective, which is just weird for me as its past sprites tend to make it upset to see you, while here it just doesn't seem to care. If this line just had the anger to it that it usually has, it would be a good line, but sadly it lost it here for some reason. 4 out of 10. Ekans is just a silly little snake. I like how the animations do resemble a snake well though, with every movement basically being its entire body. Also it just looks derpy, which is how I always picture Ekans. Arbok also looks intimidating, but like in a goofy way, and honestly I think it's a good thing. It gets scarier, but it still keeps the goofiness from an Ekans, which I think is cool. This line goes together greatly. 9 out of 10. Pikachu is Pokemon's baby, so it's only expected it to be higher quality. Well, they did with the animation at least, though I'm not exactly sure why it does the hand thing. I do like how every part moves, and at some parts not all together constantly. The sprite is also just nice looking as well. Raichu. Oh, poor Raichu. It looks so goofy and weird. The little hop is really the only thing I like about it, but just the pose and animation just doesn't really work well for Raichu with me. Now, don't think I forgot Pichu. Pichu, in my opinion, is better done than Pikachu here. The little hops ear wiggle are absolutely adorable. Now, I would give this line a higher rating because of Pikachu and Pichu, but they really did Raichu dirty here, and I can't accept that. 8 out of 10. Sandshrew in Gen 5 reminds me a lot of AJ's Sandshrew from the anime. Though on closer inspection, it doesn't actually do the little tough fist into the hand thing, but the attitude it gives off is one of wanting to be stronger, which I think is super cool. Sandslash doesn't look as cool, but it still is. The movement of the quills in the back kind of gives off sort of powering up for a kind of attack vibe, but somehow it doesn't look intimidating at all. I can't figure it out, but something's just off to me. Though overall the Sandshrew line is cool here. 8 out of 10. The little mouth being wide open just makes Nidoran weird, but the little nose wiggle and when it finally closes its mouth is absolutely adorable. Nidorina is disappointing here. For some reason it just looks and moves too much like Sandslash for me, and the person eyes aren't that similar where it's necessary for this. Nidoqueen strikes a more dance pose than a battle one, which is kinda cool, though I never pictured Nidoqueen as a ballerina myself. This kind is kinda up and down. 6.5 out of 10. I don't know if it's just me, but compared to other sprites, the ears look bigger than usual on Nidoran here. Not that it's a bad thing, as its defining feature, but it's just more noticeable than expected. But actually, I think it works well, since I said earlier, it's the defining trait overall. This Nidorino sprite isn't my favorite, but it still is great. Like with Nidoran, it seems to enlarge in ears as well. I didn't mention it before, but it seems to utilize its ears as an intimidation method as well. And it works great, as I always found Nidorina as dominant and intimidating. Nidoking, despite how simple the animation is probably one of its best sprites. It is fully open and moves with the aggression of a strong king. The Nidoran male line in Gen 5 is a great job representing an angry little dude to an all-out powerful king. 9 out of 10. Fluffy doesn't change much here. It's small and cute like always, but has brought me to a realization that it can move the little brown horns as it please, which it freaked me out a little bit. A lot. Actually, looking at Clefairy again, I don't know why I thought there were horns and not ears. The Clefairy sprite perfectly encapsulates Clefairy though, to the movement, to the pose, and just screams perfection. Clefable on the other hand, it just looks funny. It gets a stare in its eyes and it looks like it would be constantly looking past you and not at you. Its mouth and arm movements just make it look derpy too, which is not usually how Clefable is portrayed, and honestly confused why they've done this. The Clefairy line starts strong, but it just takes a weird spin. 8 out of 10. I like this version of Vulpix. It looks a lot more elegant, and the coloring makes it look shiny and clean with its fur coat, which works great because Vulpix is the elegant and posed creature, but it's funny because foxes are not like that in real life at all. Ninetales shows this off even more. Out of all the sprites, its tail is actually the biggest and fluffiest here, and the pose it takes is of power while also being graceful. But also in its eyes, you can see a more sinister side, and one to not mess with. The Vulpix line has always been a great design, and I'm glad they made it even better in Gen 5. 9 out of 10. Jigglypuff is supposed to be a balloon, yet sadly it doesn't seem that light. The little hops and skips are okay, but it lacks that lightness or bit of floating feeling that should be expected from a Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff seems to be the only one that has a balloon effect, though I think the slow float down looks more like a gliding instead of a floating, which doesn't fit right to me. It bouncing like a bouncy ball is adorable though. Now, there is Wigglytuff. I don't get it. I know it's more chonky than the other, but its movement is just so rapid. And the slow fall is just weird to look at, and its eyes are so scary. They're looking straight into my soul. I know I'm mostly focused on the animation of this line, but I think all the sprites look great. Just couldn't get over the animations. 7 out of 10. Zubat is such a goofy little fella. The speed of its flapping is quick, but could be faster. Other than that, it just looks so lost and confused, but also thirsty for blood. Golbat can actually close its mouth, but thank goodness it doesn't do it here. Golbat doesn't feel as chaotic as Zubat, but even it struggles to stay still. What bothers me most about this sprite though is the speed of the wing flapping. It just feels at a completely different FPS compared to the rest of the animations, which is just strange for Golbat to have a feature like that. Golbat looks like the best out of the line. The animation is smooth, and overall just looks great. Though I find it funny that it is the fastest one, but has the slowest movement shown. Maybe it's to show a sort of stability. I don't know. The Zubat line is chaotic, and just great. 8 out of 10. I love Oddish's Gen 5 sprite. I think it looks great, but the animation is just amazing. It's basically a little armless Mario, and I absolutely love it. I didn't expect anything great from Oddish, but I'm joyful they did. Gloom is a simple-minded creature. High on life, one may say. But I think the Gen 3 sprite is my favorite representation of Gloom. This one still looks good. Bloom sprite kinda confuses me, because in the past it seems to openly show its face or is clumsily trying, but here it seems to hide behind its flower. Though I'm glad that the little smile it has can be seen for a brief moment. The Blossom is amazing. It's exactly how I picture one. The little dance to the face, to the flower twirls. The sprite is just perfect representation. Just wish it did a little twirl, but I don't blame him for not trying to animate that. The Oddish line is simple, but I absolutely cannot refute how good it looks. 9 out of 10. Paris in the past has always been either a bit scary or a bit cute. For the Gen 5 sprite though, it's kind of both. Its eyes are big and adorable, but also gives off the appearance that it is slowly losing its own mind to the mushroom, which of course is happening. If you look closely, when the left mushroom moves, the entire body actually moves left along with it, which to me shows the control the mushroom has, and it has to move like a joystick to kind of force Paris' movement. I don't know if this is intentional, but I think it's a cool hint towards lore. Parasect seems to enhance this idea as the mushroom's now moving a lot more, and the rest of the body seems to follow. You can really see the crab it once was, no longer in control, and it's truly just the mind of a fungus. Its eyes are somehow also just constantly showing this throughout every generation. Intentional or not, these sprites do a wonderful job representing the takeover of the Paris line. 10 out of 10. I will always have a soft spot for the Venonat line. There's just something about it I just like. Now, while I don't think the Gen 5 sprite is as good as the Gen 4 sprite, because well, just look at how adorable it is here. It's still a great sprite. While the animation is nothing special, I like the way it makes it look like actual Furball or Mothball. Venonat I'm a bit disappointed in. I know it's a moth, so the quick movement is expected, but it just makes it hard to actually see the sprite. It's like a constant blur on the screen. It makes it hard to admire the beauty of Venomoth, because like that actually exists. Overall, I do like the Venonat line, well, at least Venonat itself. 6 out of 10. Diglett. Oh, Diglett. Looking at the animations, there are just so many inappropriate jokes I can make. But gotta keep this thing PG, I guess. Honestly, it's such a simple design that it looks almost exactly the same as every other generation. It's definitely something seeing Diglett stretch and wiggle and go up and down inside a hole. Anyways, Dugtrio definitely has some personality to it. I think it's funny that the only front two are angry and the middle is just there with not much personality. They're also just scrambling around, though if I were to share a hole with 3 others for the rest of my life, I would probably be angry wanting to escape as well. Anyways, the Diggle line gets a 6 out of, I mean 7 out of 10. Meowth has quite a bit of personality here. With the constant scratching and mouth movement, it's like a cat toying with its prey. Showing more of Meowth's playfulness though. I'm also glad they fixed the face size from last generation, because it just looked misshaped and huge for some reason. Version also goes through the same metamorphosis. I hope I'm using that correctly. With the size and shape of its head getting improved. Though its animations is nothing special, I do think the sprite does a great job showing a more graceful and elegant side of Persian, and not just a mean and ferocious pet like the others do. Overall, the Meowth line is an improvement from the previous generation. 8 out of 10. Psyduck throughout every generation has always kept the same pose. 2 hands on its head, blank stare of nothingness. Except for Silver, where for some reason it's picking its nose. But when it comes to Psyduck, that's all you get because, well, that's his whole gimmick. And, well, that's because the gimmick just works, and there's no really reason to change it. Now, Golduck is actually the opposite. It for some reason takes a different stance each generation, but for some reason the Gen 5 stance is just the most boring one. It doesn't say anything to me except for maybe attempting to taunt someone smaller than it. And to me, that's just kind of lame. Psyduck and Golduck are iconic Pokemon, but Golduck just doesn't do it for me here. 6 out of 10. Mankey is furious, and is not afraid to show it. But what bothers me the most is how unintimidating the pose is. There's just no way that I can make a strong attack with that kind of stance. But also, I'm not a fighting master, so who am I to say? Primeape doesn't actually do much with changing that pose, but on it, it doesn't give off a weak attack vibe, as a way that Primeape is now just making you its pet. And if you disobey it, there will be serious consequences. So while I may think Mankey is not that scary, Primeape just instills a fear that can't be undone. 8 out of 10. Growlithe from this angle looks uncanny. It looks a little bit elongated, and instead of giving it a third-dimensional effect to me, it just seems that his hind legs are floating. Besides that though, I do find it adorable, and the little playful hops and tail wag are just what Growlithe needs. Now, Arcanine is absolutely astonishing. The other generations make Arcanine to be out a big angry beast, which was always strange as the Pokédex describes its beauty and elegance to it. Gen 5 is the first to truly capture that. With its shiny coat and just peaceful movements, Arcanine's just beautiful to look at. Now, Growlithe may be a bit uncanny and awkward, but they really hit a home run with Arcanine. 9 out of 10. Alright, I'm just extremely disappointed in the Poliwag line. It just looks like they were deprived of any fun personality and character they had. With Poliwag, he just looks like nothing is going on inside his little head, but his movements just don't match that vibe to me. Poliwhirl, the star of the manga, just looks absolutely boring. It does a little hand raise every once in a while, but that's all it's got going for it. Poliwrath is just standing still, looking tough, but his eyes don't match each other and weirds me out. Politoed is the saddest one though. Usually it's like dancing around having a good time, but here it just hops up and down with not even a smile on his face. I honestly can't believe the injustice this line got. 3 out of 10. Abra is kind of perfect in Gen 5. It's just a sleepy guy that is constantly on edge of danger at the same time, and it needs to be no more than that. Dabra makes me laugh a bit, honestly, simply to the fact that it uses the spoon like a magic wand. There is just one point in the animation where it waves it around like it's going to cast a spell, and I find that funny because it just makes total sense, since it uses a spoon to enhance its powers. Alakazam actually loses me a little. It just bothers me a lot that for some reason Alakazam has to be holding its arms up and waving them around. Maybe it would look just as weird with his arms down, but it just looks silly this way as well. But I don't blame Green Freak, I wouldn't know what to do with either. The Abra line is actually great besides some weird quirks. 8 out of 10. Machop is such a happy little fella. With the pose and the face never changing, it just makes me slightly uncomfortable. I can't tell if it's showing its muscles, stretching, or just dancing. Maybe. It's just strange to look at after a while. Machop kind of makes me feel the same way, but only because of its neck. It does this little strange movement where if you look closely, its neck just kind of detaches from the body, but not at the same time. Machamp, on the other hand, is a god. Just from looking at it, it's nothing special. But if you look closely, you will see some magic. This man doesn't just show off its muscles, but it also shows off its thrusting abilities. What a creature. Okay, so the Machop line is just weird to look at if you look too closely at it, so maybe just don't do that. 6 out of 10. Honestly, Bellsprout used to be a thing out of nightmares, but it finally gets its derpy and silly look that fits more with its evolutions. The coloring is great though. I wish the pose was less just a normal stance and something more goofy. Weepinbell looks good, but to me it loses a bit of its failing silliness with its animation. It just seems more rigid than the other sprites, even though they aren't animated. Though overall the sprite isn't bad, I just don't get that same dumbfounded look. Pixie is surprisingly consistent with its past sprites, with only improvements. The body's a nice shape, and Leaf doesn't cover up the terror of its mouth. Though I do think they gave it the most boring animation of all time. While the Bellsprout line had some good aspects and bad aspects, it was honestly hard for me to form a thoughtful opinion of them because of how they were. 6.5 out of 10. Tentacruel is a design that hasn't changed much over time, and the Gen 5 sprite is no exception, taking the Diamond and Pearl sprite with no real enhancements. The animation is also just kind of lackluster because it doesn't feel like a natural movement for it. Like, how does it stay afloat or swim with its arms is such a weird position. Now, Tentacruel actually goes through a strange color change with its tentacles. For whatever reason, they completely change from the tan/beige-like color to a gray. That doesn't happen anywhere else, not even on the models. And honestly, I like it so much more. I think the color and fits the cruelty and anger it brings out, and it makes it look much more sinister than before. Why they didn't end up keeping it this way? I have no idea. Apparently Tentacruel is just perfected in Pokemon's eyes, but I will not understand the sudden change to Tentacruel. 8 out of 10. I've been staring at the Geodude line for 5 days now, and it's still just a rock. I've always liked Geodude's design because it's just a rock with muscle arms, and that's just absolutely funny to me. However, for the Gen 5 sprite, honestly doesn't do much to enhance it. The animation doesn't make it look tough at all, just kind of silly, which is eh. Graveler looks a bit cooler with the smirk, but the other arms are completely wasted being stuck to the body. It also just looks like a crab if its fingers pinching. Golem is the only one that always has little changes to it throughout each sprite. Here it seems the boulder is less round and more jaggedy than normal. Its movement also is a bit strange, like it has no neck. Other than that, it still looks good. The Geodude line is not as tough as looking as I would like it to be. 6.5 out of 10. Now usually I talk about each Pokemon individually, but since Ponyta and Rapidash are so similar, I'll do them at the same time. Now, I absolutely love these sprites. They show off the true elegance and beauty that I envision when I see a horse in the plains. The flow of the fire is just so majestic as well. Honestly, put it on a landscape photo with a mountain range in the background, and I could easily look at them all day. They did just a wonderful job with these two. 10 out of 10. I can't explain why they decided to take Slowpoke and make it sprite like this. Every iteration of Slowpoke shows it as slow and derpy, but for some reason here, it's like a small playful puppy. Not that I'm hating it, I just didn't think it could move so fast. Slowpoke fits the description perfectly. It's slow and derpy and absolutely has no thoughts going on in its head, which is what it absolutely should be. Slowking, of course, is the opposite since the venom enhances his brain power, and it does well showing the king leader it tries to be, with his hands also displaying the wisdom it has to share. The Slowpoke line for Gen 5 displays almost perfectly what it represents. 9 out of 10. There's just something that always made me like Magnemite. Maybe because it's just a silly little metal ball with magnet arms. It's just one of those Pokemon that is hard to hate. It's also one with the most consistent appearance. In Generation 5 as well, all they did was basically give it an animation, which it does well, showing the electricity throw through his body, and it's unable to stand still for long and properly control it. Magneton I find funny, because to me it shows how much Magnemite reacts to being stuck to each other. Just like they don't seem to be excited about it. But would you be happy if you were stuck to 2 other humans? Magnezone now is a bit different. Having only 2 past sprites to base it off of. While I don't like the decision to have the blue and red turn off on the magnets the entire time, I do like its eyes constantly moving around trying to find a target. Something I wish the other 2 did. Overall, they are a great set of sprites. 8 out of 10. Farfetch'd represents a soldier. A weak one, but a soldier indeed. In Gen 5, its wings open up and does the little tap with its left leg, and that's about it. It's more like a child playing soldier, and honestly, I like it. 7 out of 10. Doduo has always been my favorite bird line in Kanto, but how does it look in Gen 5? Well, for one, it's just the platinum sprite, but animated, so, like a lot of the Gen 5 sprites. Despite this being, though, it does look good. I do wish the heads were a little bit more in sync, like the Pokédex suggests, and the other doesn't seem to be trying to get away. And the legs could move a little bit more since they do rely so heavily on them, but maybe that's just too much to ask for. Dodrio tends to show this off better. Its 3 heads are in sync and ready for battle ahead, and the clawing in the right foot shows eagerness on its attacks. It also just looks cool altogether. Doduo and Dodrio are cool Pokemon. 7 out of 10. Seal is just a seal. One thing I'm surprised about is how non-silly the animation is. Like, I thought there would be more to it since it's a seal, but nah, it's just a little flap and that's about it, which is disappointing to me. Dewgong isn't much different in that sense. While it does still have goofy, elegant look, I think the blend leans a little more towards that goofy side. Instead of being a 50-50 mix, I think the past sprites seem to represent better. While I don't think Seal line is bad here, I just think they could have been a bit better. 6 out of 10. Grimer's ability to stay in one shape is actually impressive. Being just a little goo monster, you may find to have different shapes and sizes in sprites. While it kind of does, Gen 5 is a good mix of all the past sprites. It makes it a little bit more hunched over and ready for movement, but still holds that dumbfounded happy face, which I really like. Muck kind of does the opposite. It takes a step back and takes a bit more of a neutral stance, unlike the past sprites, which shows it more aggressive, which I don't understand really. It just makes it more boring to look at. And the animation doesn't help it either. Honestly, I don't know how they made Grimer better, but Muck worse. 7 out of 10. I'm actually a big fan of Shelter in Gen 5. The whole vibe just feels on point to me. The tongue actually acting like a tongue, and the slow and steady closing of his shell is just a great representation of how clams actually move in the sea. Poster holds true to this as well. The little greedy smirk and slow movement of the shell makes it look like someone's teasing their opponent, which I think is awesome. Shelter and Cloister just look great in this gen. 9 out of 10. Gastly being just a ball of gas doesn't leave much room for change. But one thing over the years is the change of how Gastly goes from a more sinister, scary look for a more playful one, which still makes sense and more fits the role of how it's shown in other media and not the games. Contour of his hands expanding and cheek use of his mouth just looks absolutely cool. Though I wish they showed more of the sinister but in a jokery side, where it leans toward the more sinister side here. Gengar for some reason has one of the smoothest animations, and I'm not complaining. The devious smile and the little side hop is just simple but effective. The shakiness of his smile just leaves me a little bit disturbed as well. The Gastly line isn't perfect, but damn, they did a good job on them. 9 out of 10. Onix's Gen 5 sprite is not that impressive. The sprite itself looks okay, but the animation just throws me off. Onix in the past is more intimidating to look because of his sheer size, but here it just seems to struggle to stand. The center balance is just completely off, and because of that, Onix is stuck constantly moving to keep balance, making it lose the intimidation to me. Felix is even worse. This guy doesn't even look like it's on the ground. Though the face is still holding the intimidation, the slithering back and forth just makes it look goofy to me, like it's being mesmerized like a snake instead of ready for battle. Onix's Steelix used to be big and intimidating. Now they just look goofy. 5 out of 10. Drowsy has always been a strange Pokemon, and here it definitely continues that aesthetic. Though, since it does use its nose a lot, I would expect more movement from it in the animation. Here seems to mainly just wiggle its arms in a slowly and hypnotic way. When every dex entry talks about its ability to sniff out dreams, you would think one would use it more. But besides that, I do like how silly it appears. Hypno is not what I was expecting. The sprite itself looks good overall, don't get me wrong, but the way it sways its pendulum just seems way too fast to have any hypnotic effect. Like it's just fiddling with it instead of trying to use it for its purpose. But maybe it's good how ineffective it would be, since it tries to kidnap children. 6 out of 10. Krabby is just an adorable little guy. But man, does this sprite make me feel like they missed a lot of potential it had. Krabby has a lot of personality to it, but the sprite just seems so devoid of it. Like, it's at a cool angle, but it's just bland and boring to look at compared to the past sprites. In the animation, it doesn't even pinch his claws that much, and missed a big opportunity of having it bubble from the mouth a little bit like it does in the anime. Kingler follows this as well. The animation could have shown his strength, but with its huge claw, it just steadily bobs up and down and doesn't really pinch it. Though I do like the sprite, it's majorly held back by its animation. I absolutely love Krabby and Kingler, but I just think they missed it with them in Gen 5. 6 out of 10. Voltorb being just an angry Pokeball doesn't leave much to interpret. However, I do believe they did an outstanding job on it. Being just a ball of eyes, its sprite is just basically the same as every other one, just a different angle. The animation is where it truly shines though. The slow back and forth is usual for any mon, but I love the quick glance back as if it implies that the fight isn't worth its time, which gives it much more personality and ego to Voltorb, and kinda gives that little tough guy vibe. Electrode tends to take this and literally flip its personality as well, being more of a funny uncle instead of an angry dwarf. And I don't know why, but the little eyebrow rest is just amazing to me. I honestly don't know how they could improve the sprite besides maybe adding a fake out explosion. 9.5 out of 10. Exeggcute is such a fun little design, being just a bunch of eggs working together, or well, more like seeds in this case, though comparatively throughout the generations it has one major change per generation. That is just the middle egg tends to get smaller. And while it is still a bit larger than the rest, I do believe it makes it look better as it still looks like the leader but it doesn't completely overshadow the rest. Its animation isn't anything special and is even shorter than most Pokemon. The Exeggcute with the animation is the same way. It's just a small bob up and down and well, that is it. The sprite itself is actually kind of interesting. While the past sprites tend to show all the heads facing up, this one has it facing down, showing more of the grass on its head and the true thickness of its hair. However subtle the changes, I do tend to like it better. There really isn't anything special about the Gen 5 sprites comparatively to its past, but I still tend to like them nonetheless. 7 out of 10. Cubone is just a lost child trying to act older as it fends to itself. In Gen 5 it's displayed greatly in its pose and animation, where it's used as a bone as an intimidation weapon, but ends up doing something to look tough only to lose balance and then forced to recover. It's a great way of showing off that even though it now has to fight for itself, it's still just a child not being able to fully do so. Now, Marowak is a completely different beast, and honestly the animation just leaves me baffled and completely confused. Like, how does he flip a thing with the bone while also twisting its hand on the way down, making you think it flipped his hand around in the bone, but then he got back straight up to the position it was before, and it should be impossible because the way it flipped his hand unless it did a 360, which means that hand is not fully attached to the body and could just dislocate itself, which is a strange feature for Marowak to have, right? Oh wait, it actually just drops the bone, flipping it in the air before catching it again. Problem solved, I guess. 8 out of 10. Hitmonlee, the kicking master of Pokemon. While I do like the pose it's in, the eyes are just so weird to look at. While they are a major improvement from Diamond and Pearl, it's just so strange. Hitmonchan is the perfect boxer. While I don't know the proper form of a boxer, the swift punches and mean stare makes it a foe I wouldn't want to mess with. Hitmontaan's sprite looks super nice. However, I would expect it to spin a little bit rather than just totter. I understand that would be hard to animate the spinning, but even if it just added a little more arm movement, it could help a lot. Tyrogue is just a small little guy, but I do enjoy the flow of power going through it when it shoves at the opponent. It's a bit cartoony, but shows that even though that Tyrogue is little, it can still hit hard. This line isn't anything amazing, but it gets the job done. 7 out of 10. Lickitung in Gen 5 is definitely the most body-focused sprite. Not that his tongue isn't a defining feature, just doesn't take up as much space as it normally does. But this Pokemon just always freaked me out a little. I mean, that's kind of the point of the design, I guess, but the tongue's flick is just so gross, and I just don't feel right with how it curls up. And that blank stare. Licky is just something straight out of Willy Wonka's factory. And tongue still gross me out a lot, but the arms thrown back before it just eats its tongue is hilarious. Especially because the eyes just keep that blank stare or creepiness at all times. times. The Lickitung line are gross and creepy, but I guess that's just how they are. 8 out of 10. Koffing has always been one of my favorite poison types, just being a silly ball of pollution that was originally named after popular US cities. Koffing is just great, and in Gen 5 it still looks amazing. The whole warped expansion of its face is just goofy to the extreme, and I love that the absolute just blank stare at holes the entire time. Weezing is a bit different. It's no longer fun, has even grown a tumor, and just looks so sad to be alive, and honestly I don't blame it. And that once happy thriving animation Koffing had is now a slow and difficult breath, which I don't know if it was done on purpose. It's still super cool. The Koffing line is the true embodiment of air pollution. 10 out of 10. For Rhyhorn, its Gen 5 sprite is actually probably my least favorite one. For one, it gets awkwardly elongated where its past sprites are more squished and smaller, and the animation is just uninteresting to look at. It doesn't even rev up either, which is disappointing. Rhydon, the first Pokemon ever drawn, is honestly and actually pretty cool. It takes the personalities of the Sinnoh sprites and puts it together with its animation. The big taunting laughter it does, just making it seem bigger and more intimidating than it really is. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Rhyperior. However, I've always had a soft spot for it. Therefore, I do agree that its Gen 5 sprite doesn't do much to better its image. It just seems to exist with a boring animation and not even a cool pose. I wish they did a bit more with it. The Rhyhorn line is a cool line, however, they are poorly represented in Gen 5. 6 out of 10. Chansey is so joyful with its little egg. It's just dancing around and using the egg as a drum, which just makes me feel something, which is neat. Blissey is kind of weird. It seemed to have lost a lot of weight, which I just find funny because its model gives it all back. Though with the animation, it just kind of is strange. The stretch it makes is just uncomfortable to watch, and I wish I never saw it move like that. Happiny, I'm impartial to. It definitely exists, but honestly not much to say besides it's the Gen 4 sprite lazily animated, and that's honestly just disappointing. Not that Happiny has a big influence, and you're going to see it a lot anyways. Honestly, Chansey is the only good part of this line. 5 out of 10. Wait, hold on. Time out. This is editing me. I somehow totally missed the little egg throw Happiny does, and therefore I changed my mind. 8 out of 10. Tango has always been one of those Pokemon that just reminds me of Looney Tunes. Having no arms and just vines covering its face with those big ol' eyes is just a fun but weird design. Now the Gen 5 sprite does tend to lose a lot of the character. It just stands and, well, that's about it. While others tend to do something at least. Here it just doesn't do that. Tangrowth decided to stand again, which I actually don't like. I think it should continue sitting like the Platinum sprite. But also if it was, we wouldn't get the cute little hula hoop wiggle it does, which makes up for it for losing that part, I believe. Now Tangela and Tangrowth are just forgettable mons, but they are quite chill here. 8 out of 10. Kangaskhan is a Pokemon, I can never spell its name right, but here we're talking about its sprite, not its name. The animation is actually quite pleasing to look at. It doesn't do anything special, but the way it just flows just feels right and natural, which for some Pokemon it doesn't always do. But one thing that's weird is how it looks exhausted and tired, which makes sense for the middle of a fight, but to constantly be that way makes me sad. It constantly is moving and never stops, ever. Maybe it's to represent that's apparent, but who knows. 9 out of 10. Horsea's sprites have always been consistent. Because of its coloring, it's hard to tell the quality increase from Gen 3, unlike other Pokemon. And I think that is just cool. Its Gen 5 sprite animation is absolutely adorable. It just sells me that cute little seahorse. Seadrift's animations just look ugly. It's just too stiff to me, and yeah, that may be because of how angry it is, but that doesn't excuse the awkwardness that not moving its tail brings. Even if it moved just a little, it could enhance it a lot. I don't really know what Kindra is trying to be. It's supposed to be kingly, right? But besides the name, I never got the royal look from it. And even here, it just doesn't do it for me. It could just be design is just too basic to me, but not even the animation sells me that either. Horsea is wonderful. I love it. But the other two just disappoint me in a way that they shouldn't. 6 out of 10. Goldeen has always been funny to me, just because it's a koi fish with the horn slapped on it, and its animation is just fish in the water, which honestly is perfect for it. Goldeen needs to be nothing more than just fish. Also, look at its mouth. Seeking is basically the same thing. I don't have much more to say. Goldeen and Seeking look amazing as fish. 9 out of 10. Staryu is actually hard to judge. I like to see if the sprite pose and animation fit the personality given to the Pokemon. But when it comes to Staryu, it just doesn't exactly have a personality. It's a living star, but with that kind of sci-fi feel to it. And in Gen 5, it's just as bland as it usually is, which works as it just doesn't do anything special, though I wish it had more spin to it. Starmie has an attempt at a personality as it now starts going up and down and incorporating the second star in the spin move it does, and makes it feel more alive than Staryu did. And the sprite does just look good regardless. Honestly, despite the boringness of the Staryu line, it does portray the sci-fi alien-like thing that it is decently well. 8 out of 10. I think the biggest miss with Mr. Mime is that it never shakes his hand in circles, like it does basically everywhere else. Which makes me so disappointed because instead they decided to opt with the slow back and forth stomping it does. And yeah, it still looks good and still follows the movement of a Mime, but it just feels lame compared to what we could have gotten. Now the pre-evolution Mime Jr. is just doing its thing, bouncing on its foot, trying not to fall, though its whole thing is mimicking other Pokemon when it sees them. I realize it would be an insane task to do that with every Pokemon, but I guess mutually mocking every Pokemon works too. The Mr. Mime line is simple, but could have been way more expressive than they are. 6 out of 10. Scyther in Gen 5 just looks awesome. It's down in focus, which to me just shows the strike first, think later vibe that Scyther has always given. I mean, with its high attack and speed, it just makes sense for it, though I wish the animation was a bit more aggressive. Scizor loses a lot of its speed and instead gains a high defense, which I think also shows well with this Gen 5 sprite. It's more open to accepting attack and being able to counter it instead of hoping the first strike hits, which I'm surprised more of its past sprites haven't done. The little jab of its arm too just makes it seem like it's mocking you, knowing it can handle whatever you send at it, and it's just so cool. The dynamic of strike first to strike last is just shown so well with these sprites. 9 out of 10. Oh no, it's Jynx. Like, why does this thing exist? But anyways, I can't let my judgment of Jynx as a whole decide trading. So how does this Gen 5 sprite represent Jynx? It's horrifying. Absolutely disturbing. Why is it constantly trying to kiss the air, and what the hell is that pose? It's like a dance, but the absolute weirdest dance I could think of. I guess all of that is a good thing. Smoochum looks good. I mean, anything is better than the Gen 2 sprites, so that's not much to say. The pose is cute and the animation is cute, besides when it jumps. That just makes me concerned. But overall, it is a cute sprite and represents Smoochum well. But I'm glad they didn't go path of making it trying to kiss everything. Honestly, as scary looking Jynx is, it does represent characteristics well, so I'll give it that, along with Smoochum. 7 out of 10. Electabuzz has always just reminded me of bullies, or at least a stereotypical version of them. Its sprite has always seemed to portray this as well. It also looks a bit skinnier as it's less condensed now, which looks good. Elekid looks great. While the pose is nothing amazing, and I wish it would have spun its arms, the little arm raise with it shaking like it's zapped is adorable. Electivire confuses me. Yeah, the sprite looks good, but the animation is just, huh? Like, why did they opt to do this weird jump like an ape instead of maybe using its tail to like zap electricity? I just can't wrap my head around that idea process. As a whole, the line looks great, but with some adjustments, it would be greater. 8 out of 10. Magmar here reminds me of an animatronic mascot like Chuck E. Cheese. With the arm, it just looks so stiff and robotic. It just kind of makes Magmar uncomfortable to look at. Also, why did they change the way it has its beak? Magby hasn't changed much since the original appearance in Johto, where it looked best and not so sad. Anyways, I feel like Magby's animation doesn't fit the sprite. Like, the absolute fear in his face with the jump is just so awkward to look at. Just why does this exist? Magmar actually looks good. It's a bit more relaxed, but gives off an ugly / ogre Cyclops vibe as it immediately stares down its enemy, which I think is actually cool, and along with the flames on the shoulder pads are just sick. The Magmar line is all over the place, but that's okay sometimes. 7 out of 10. I just don't understand why Pinsir is posed like this. Like, it doesn't look intimidating or scary, it just looks like it wants to do the limbo. At least its past sprites make it look like it wants to hit you. Here it just looks like a claw machine trying to eat the sun. 5 out of 10. Boros looks good, but I just don't think it looks as angry as it used to. Like, it could just be the angle it's at, but it just looks so docile. Even the little skid of the foot just doesn't seem that intimidating. I mean, it is, but it could be way scarier. I think just a little bit of smoke out of the nose and then dust clouds from the dirt could make a huge difference. 7 out of 10. Magikarp's sprite is actually super hilarious. Like, it's out of water, but instead of flopping around, it's using its whiskers as feet. I don't think that was the intention, but it just looks absolutely incredible regardless. Now, I'm kind of disappointed that it decided to use Gyarados Platinum sprite to animate, as it's basically my least favorite one. It's just plain and boring, and honestly, I feel like I should fear Gyarados, and this just doesn't do that for me. Not even the animation makes it more intimidating, just silly. Magikarp is outstanding, but they dropped the ball with Gyarados. 7 out of 10. Lapras looks so good here. It's just graceful and elegant, but also still shows that playfulness side to it, which I'm surprised they were able to express such opposite mannerisms with each other. But they did it. It's wonderful to look at. 10 out of 10. I don't know how to describe Ditto, but boring and fun at the same time. While I wish the animation was a bit more goofy, the mushing of the face is kind of funny. But I think it's insane. As much as you can do with Ditto, you really can't do much either. It's just a big blob of goop. So I think Gen 1 and 2 represent it best. 6 out of 10. 60 seconds to write 7 evolutions and Eevee sprites. Let's go. Eevee looks super good. I actually really like that sitting and does a cute little wiggle. Did you know Vaporeon looks kind of weird? Why did they give it a baby face? Jolteon I wish was a bit more electrifying than it is, but it still looks good. Flareon is super clean and does a cute thing with its tail. Espeon's pose makes it look alien, which I love since it gives alien vibes. Umbreon screams the moon to me, and I love it. Leafeon is elegant and posed, and the stretch is adorable. Glaceon looks good, but I don't like that its little hair loops cover its face, making it seem like 2 arms, and it weirds me out. Overall, they did a fantastic job on Eevee and the evolution sprites. 9 out of 10. Porygon does a great job of making it appear out of a computer. It moves like it's twitching, which to me represents like how computers can just spike in speed, but then go back to a slow state and then go back again, which I think looks so cool. Porygon 2 just floats back and forth rather smoothly like an upgrade should do. It's honestly a bit hypnotic to watch. Porygon Z is a bit disappointing. This is a Pokemon that's meant to move fast and be, well, a computer error, but well, for some reason it's just calm and slow, which I don't think fits the Pokemon at all. As a whole, the line looks good, but sadly Porygon Z is just not represented properly. 7 out of 10. Omanyte's eyes are definitely the most defined feature. That constant big ol' stare while it gently floats up and down makes me question my life choices. Omastar's animation truly emphasizes the sanity of it. It's not much, and honestly it's just Omanyte's animation, but with more tentacles wiggling. But it just looks so much funnier in Almastar, and I love it. They might simply sink and float, but are great nonetheless. 8 out of 10. Kabuto looks super cute. I do find it funny how much of the underside shown here, since it's always been a more front view or just from the top in Gen 1, but it makes sense since the back sprites tend to mimic the fronts properly. I don't understand how scythes work, but it just doesn't seem to be used correctly on Kabutops. It's just cut in the air in front of it, but also it doesn't seem to be able to cut anything, which is okay, but makes Kabutops look more goofy than anything. Kabuto and Kabutops aren't anything special in Gen 5, honestly a bit lackluster. 6 out of 10. The sprite evolution of Aerodactyl actually tells a funny story, because we see in Gen 5 it actually looks like it wants to battle against the opponent, which we haven't seen in a while. Like in red and blue it looks super aggressive, yellow it just wants to run away. Gen 2 it just looks like someone's scared it half to death. Gen 3 it starts getting curious again, and Gen 4 as well, the same sprite, but still it is there. Honestly, just the sprite story as a whole makes me love this sprite. 9 out of 10. Everyone knows by now Snorlax's efforts through generations to stand up, while Gen 5 is his last big effort to do so. But honestly, I'm not too impressed with his sprite here. The animation is smooth, and the big yawn is cool, and keeps his personality, but besides that there isn't much to this guy. I mean, for a sleeping giant, I guess there isn't much you can do. Munchlax is absolutely adorable. It stands up itself and does this little march that I adore. Now, if they only add a little more eye movement, then I would just like it so much more. 8 out of 10. Isn't Arcanine supposed to be like an elegant bird of ice? Here it just looks like it wants to beef up its opponent. But I guess that is true, since it never actually looked that elegant in the past either. Maybe I'm just wrong to assume that. But if you think that as a legendary, you would have more grace to it. 6 out of 10. Zapdos is my favorite of the three birds, mainly because of how much the electric vibe I get from it. In Gen 5, it still looks great. It flies above, staring at the weaklings below it, just ready to zap you with a bolt of lightning. It's so cool, but I wish the animation gave it a bit more life than just a simple wave back and forth. 9 out of 10. Moltres the rubber chicken, but on fire. Honestly, out of all the Gen 4 sprites, I'm disappointed they went with the Diamond Pearl Platinum ones, and not the Heart Gold Soul Silver one. Not that it's bad, but the standing is just so much cooler looking and would be way cooler animated. While now it just seems to glide in place with a few flaps, which I never have liked. Moltres could have been way cooler, and I just can't forgive that. 6 out of 10. This is definitely one of Dratini's better sprites. I like the pose and it just looks adorable. And for being a snake, they always seem to come in one position. The one Dragonair is in. Now, there's nothing wrong with this position, it is more natural and it does still look good, but Dragonair should be more shown a bit more elegant and not like Gyarados from Heart Gold Soul Silver. Dragonite I find funny. For some reason they decided to tighten up its body instead of having it more even with the torso. And it's a nice looking change, but this only time is represented like that, which is quite interesting to see. Dratini and its lines are amazing, but look good in Gen 5. 7 out of 10. Mewtwo honestly looks a bit lame. This all-powerful Pokemon that wouldn't even give a second thought about destroying humans, now suddenly doesn't look as intimidating. Yeah, it still looks mean in the face, but the pose is just not doing it for me. While past it looks way meaner and cruel. Here it opens itself up, and that I just don't understand. 5 out of 10. I'm not the biggest fan of Mew's Gen 5 sprite. Mew's supposed to be the super playful and a bit of a trickster, and usually is curled up a bit, toying with the opponent. But here it just seems to want to fly aimlessly, and not even the animation saves it. It just takes away a big part of his personality, and that makes me majorly sad. 4 out of 10.